So, Matt and Kate, first of all, welcome. I'm so overjoyed to have you on to speak to you about this. And first off, I just wanted to ask, you originally planned to, and you did, travel to Israel for the October 7th anniversary, but that trip did change when the war expanded into a new front and your focus became Lebanon. So, Matt, I'll go to you first. Why was it important to go to Lebanon at this time?
So we went to the Middle East last year in the week after the October 7 attacks. And as part of that reporting, we went up to the northern border in Israel. And even then, at that early stage of the war, this was an important part of it, was the conflict in the southern part of Lebanon, the northern part of Israel, where Hezbollah was firing rockets into Israel as an act of solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. And this continued throughout the past year, but at a relatively low level, certainly compared to the intensity of the conflict in Gaza. It didn't get as much attention in the international media, but around 60,000 Israelis were evacuated from their homes in the north because of this. But in recent weeks, in the past month, it's really intensified into a very significant war, including with airstrikes on Beirut, one of the big capitals in the Middle East that everyone knows about. It's lifted to a new level. So we thought it was very important to go to Lebanon and see what's happening on the other side of the border. We'd seen the story from the people on the Israeli side. We wanted to go and tell the story of what's happening on the Lebanese side of the border. Lebanon is a very important story for Australia because of the huge Lebanese Australian community here, and also the amount of Australians in Lebanon. The estimates aren't certain, around 15,000. People say there are many more. While we were there were government-funded evacuation flights to get Australians out of there. So this is the part of the world that's very important for Australia, and I don't think we should be relying on international wire services to tell that story.
And of course, so much of what's happening there is centered in Beirut, obviously other places as well. So, Matt, let's go back to you just for a moment. Can you actually paint a picture for us of what life is like in Beirut now?
So, we landed during a pretty high intensity stage of the conflict. This was after the assassination of the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah. This is after the pager attacks that we'd all been writing about here. Airstrikes are particularly clustered around the southern suburbs of Beirut. So we flew in on the national carrier of Lebanon, which is MEA Airlines. They've continued flying. That's essentially the way you get in and out. They're continuing to fly. Arrived in Beirut, and right away I noticed how busy it was, how much traffic there was, how hectic the city was, which, as discover quickly talking to people there, is because of the mass evacuations, the mass displacement from elsewhere in the country. Right now, around a quarter of the country is under an Israeli evacuation order, meaning they've been told to get out of their house. So most of southern Lebanon has fled north, and people from the southern suburbs of Beirut have fled elsewhere to the city. So the southern part of the city is pretty deserted. Some people are staying there, but streets empty, most of the businesses closed, whereas in the center of the city, it's absolutely jam-packed. And driving along very early, we saw people camping out, people sleeping on the beach in tents on the sand, people sleeping along the waterfront. For example, imagine something similar to Circular Quay in Sydney, or the Docklands in Melbourne. If people were sleeping out there in their tents, there's a lot of devastation. So many people. One of the first things we saw driving out of the airport were huge billboards of Hassan Nasrallah, which is really striking, and not advertisements for big corporations, but images of this Hezbollah leader who'd been assassinated a few weeks before, and that really showed what a central role this group plays in Lebanese society. In Australia, Hezbollah is a designated terrorist entity, but there you quite quickly realize it's a political party, it's a paramilitary force, it's a social welfare organization. It's got very deep roots a divisive organization there, but that's something you really have to tangle with the moment you get out of the airport.
And Kate, I want to turn to you because you and Matt, of course, were in Beirut when an Israeli bomb killed 22 people in an apartment building. So tell us about that day and what happened, and also when you visited that site 2 days later.
So we'd been up in the northern part of Lebanon talking to Australians who basically were going to be staying. And when we were coming back into Beirut that night, all of a sudden, we follow all these telegram channels, up come these alerts. We look up into the skyline and you can see the smoke. There'd been an IDF hit, airstrike. The traffic was chaotic. There were ambulances, trying to push their way through basically 3 to 4 cars across. It was very loud, and we then visited. So we don't visit a strike directly after a hit because of the threat that the IDF will do a loop around and hit another place, which they did that night. Not directly at the same place, but we usually try and find a spot which is a little bit away where we can see, overlook. Anyway, so 2 days later we actually went to the site, and that's where we interviewed and spent time with civilians and residents. At the time we also were there, a senior member of the Iranian government visited. There were also people coming out of the rubble being assisted by emergency services with their bags of possessions. What else was there? There was a particular smell, as there is with all strike sites or bomb sites.
And how would you describe that smell?
Like the smell after a match is lit. It's pungent. It's
sulfuric almost.
Yes, and it's. But also there's a lot of dust in the air.
Yeah.
There's, it's you can pretty much tell like that a weapon or something has exploded. It's a distinct smell.
And so Matt, I want to turn to you. What is something from this trip that you'll just never forget?
I think it was a story we did a few days after that. In northern Lebanon. Now, as Kate was just saying, that was one of the first places we went after we arrived. Northern Lebanon is a hub for Australians. Many Lebanese Australians live in that part of the country. It had been a relatively safe place, only a couple of strikes compared to very high-intensity conflict in the south. And in southern Beirut, several Australians we spoke to there said, no, we have no interest at all in taking a free flight back to Australia. We feel safe and secure here. This is where our life is. Look around. We're in the beautiful mountains here. We're going to stay put. Yeah. And then a few days later, we did get the news alerts about a strike in a town called I2, which it was very close to where we had been a few days earlier. So we went back there. Now, this is a very small Maronite Christian village, not a place where Hezbollah is very entrenched, and the people there didn't think they would be a target. They thought they were in one of the safest parts of the country. But it was hit by an Israeli strike, and estimates were around 23 people died. The families who lived there were in shock. They had rented out their house to a displaced family from the south. The suggestion from everything we were picking up was that a Hezbollah official or someone who the Israeli military believed was a Hezbollah official was visiting the house. They hit it with a strike. And while we were there, this was the day after, so quite a bit had been done the previous afternoon. But while we were there, the authorities did identify a small child, we believe a 6-month-old, around that baby that was still there, the body, and the Red Cross workers, were going about their work very diligently, I think, with a lot of care and professionalism to try and find the remains at this scene. But yeah, a very sad sight, just that this was a family fleeing the war in the south, looking for a safe place to be, and then they got killed. You know, the elderly people, young people, a very big family. And the sight of that does stick with you in this really beautiful place in the mountains that felt like a very kind of serene place to be. And it was, very, very, very sad place to be that day.
And you did write when you reported about that, you know, when you do see something like that, it is tempting to look away. So I guess how important is it to bear witness to things like that?
Yeah, and you're aware that back in Australia, this might not be something that people want to read or want to engage with. It's confronting. There's a lot going on in the world. People may not want to think about difficult issues, but it's important too. So I felt that sense of you have to try and help get people to think about this, to engage with this, or else you're just looking away from what's happening.
And so, Kate, tell me from your perspective, what's something from this particular trip that you won't forget?
Just that once again, this is happening to Lebanese civilians. Once again, their homes are being bombed, their lives are being destroyed. And just touching on what Matthew just said about, not looking or not seeing things that are confronting. For me personally, it's a huge responsibility that we have to photograph and document what's happening. So I don't have the right to turn away. It's important that we show exactly what's happening, and people can choose not to look at the news or read the story, but we have a responsibility to the readers to tell them exactly what's happening, as horrific and as sad as some occasions are.
And Kate, I want to turn to you and ask about Gaza, because obviously outside journalists have been blocked from entering Gaza to see for their own eyes the horrors of what's going on there. How much of a difference would it make if you had similar access to what you had in Lebanon?
Well, I think, first of all, the Palestinian media that are in Gaza are doing a phenomenal job at a huge cost.
Yeah.
Over 170 have been killed, according to Gaza, media sources. The thing is that all countries, reporters from all countries should be given access to Gaza. If any country or military tries to limit access to any conflict area, they're trying to control the narrative. If you are allowing NGOs, foreign or international NGOs into Gaza, then the argument that they can't protect us or safety is an issue is a redundant, thing. Especially when you've got reporters who have been covering conflicts for many, many decades. So I think it's crucial that all journalists be given access to Gaza. It holds people account for their actions. It can investigate, potential war crimes and crimes against humanity in the absence of a justice system. It is absolutely crucial that we are all there.
And you mentioned just before that the thing that sticks with you is that once again, the Lebanese civilians are being bombed. And of course, the reason why you would speak about that, of course, is because you have spent a lot of time there and you obviously reported in 2006 on the war there. So tell us, I guess, about what differences you noticed perhaps between, when you covered it in 2006 to now.
So 2006, I was there with Paul McGough, and we were there pretty much the entire time of the conflict. So there's a few similarities, and that is the huge displacement of people, roughly the same amount, like 1 million, just over 1 million. In 2006, we travelled all throughout the country. We were based in Tyre, we were in Nabatea. We were down on the border with Israel. We were in Beirut in the north. We saw a huge amount of wounded. We saw violations of, basically war crimes being committed, ambulances being hit. We saw, bombs destroying homes. We saw, huge amount of people in hospitals trying to identify their loved ones, mass graves. So the similarities are, displacement, destroyed lives. What is different this time is the constant sound of drones. So when you watch Al Jazeera, for example, and from Gaza, and you see the reporters and you hear this drone constantly in the background, in Beirut, you hear that all the time, day and night. And that's obviously an Israeli drone. The first time we ever saw a drone was in 2006 during the war, but it was dropping bombs. So, now it's a huge part of the military kind of toolkit. The other thing that's similar is the places that the IDF were initially bombing, same kind of town. So you could almost, read what was going to happen or see what was going to happen because you'd covered it before. You knew the towns, you knew the communities. What is different this time is that there are certain areas that are being bombed now that were never touched before. Places like Juni, Christian areas. So, it's a lot more indiscriminate. The death toll is doubled. The wounded is now over 11,000. I think it was roughly 4,000, 3,500, 4,000.
In Lebanon?
In Lebanon, yeah. So the death toll and the wounded is increasing. They're also targeting, medical clinics as well this time, nearby. So same as what is happening in Gaza, really, but on a smaller scale. At this point.
I was just going to add, I wasn't there like Kate in 2006, but just something that speaking to people there, they did mention what we were talking about before, just the difference with the nature of the Lebanese state now is that what Ronnie Chatter, who is a political commentator there, his father was a senior Lebanese politician who was assassinated. He was talking about back in 2006, the Lebanese government was relatively strong, was capable of negotiating this ceasefire, this UN resolution, which we're all becoming more familiar with, Resolution 1701, which was about the idea of demilitarizing southern Lebanon, creating a kind of buffer between Israel and Lebanon. Now, that hasn't really been enforced over time, and that's kind of the core of this problem. But they got this solution, they negotiated it. There was a government there that could get in and try and bring an end to this war. That's very different right now. There's no sense that there's a government that can get something done here, which is pretty troubling when you start to think about how is this going to end? What's the end game? How is this war going to come to any kind of end this time? Israel feels that they're achieving significant kind of tactical victories, but what's the ultimate end game in terms of strategy?
And just a question for both of you, Kate, I'll ask you first. When you are blocked out of entering a war zone like that, like Gaza, do you think of other previous conflicts in history that come to mind when you think about the photos that came out of them that actually changed the course of wars? I'm thinking about Vietnam. My understanding about Vietnam is that when that reporting came out of Vietnam, it completely changed the American people's support or lack of support of the war. Are there certain sort of conflicts that come to mind for you where you think, well, it's because of these photos and these reports came out that it actually changed the course of that conflict?
I think every conflict has images that resonate with the public. Palestinian photographers are putting out images that are, affecting people. As Matthew said, people protest around the country every weekend because of images, be it TV or, moving images or still images. So I think, every conflict has images. Mariupol in Ukraine, the pregnant lady on a stretcher that the Russian military had just bombed. That image resonated. There's an image of a young boy on a sand face down, during the refugee crisis in Europe. The images will also always move us, but it's a matter of if leaders listen and want to change things.
Matt, is that something you ever think about at previous conflicts where the reporting, from the actual conflicts on the ground has perhaps, really changed the course of history?
Well, this actually happened in Lebanon in 1982 when Israel launched an invasion. Ronald Reagan was president at the time, and he's got diary notes about this, that the war was going on. America, obviously, is a key ally of Israel in terms of supplying military aid. But there was a photo of a 7-month-old child that had its limbs blown off because of the war, and that really affected Ronald Reagan. For some reason, that photo particularly resonated with him, and he got on the phone with the Israeli Prime Minister at the time and said, "This war's too brutal, it's going on too long, I'm going to cut off your military aid if you keep going." And then in his telling, very soon after, the Israeli Prime Minister rang back and said, "Okay, I'm stopping attacking Beirut."
And I guess to that point, to wrap up, Kate, I'll go to you first. Is there anything that you wish that leaders who have little or often no battlefield experience knew that you have gleaned from being in battle zones, in war zones?
One thing I would want leaders to to consider would be that the decisions they make reverberates through generations. At the end of the day, their decisions destroy lives, and they can stop wars if they want to.
Matt, what about you?
Just when you're there, you see the complexity of it, just in terms of we talk about evacuation orders and people have been told to leave, and we write about this in a kind of abstract way. Then you go there and you see that it's very real. Like, what you get down to the issues of where are people going, how are they getting there, where is a safe place for them. Yeah, we've had people we were speaking to had already in a few weeks been displaced from several locations already, and we're running out of anywhere to go. You just get that granular understanding of the huge impact it has on people, how complicated it is, and as Kate says, that has a long-lasting impact on people, for the rest of their lives.
It reminds me of, I think, one of the most moving images and pieces of reporting that you both did on this recent trip was of a woman. I believe she was a mother of 4 of 6, and she was photographed on a beach at sunset. I think she was a Syrian refugee somewhere in Lebanon. And I was so struck because the last piece of the article, the very last thing, is a quote from her saying, "Oh, it's such a beautiful time of day. It's the best time of day because it was at sunset." And meanwhile, this is someone who is sleeping on a beach, and winter's approaching, and she's, how is she going to shelter her children? And I found that incredibly moving.
And displaced twice from war.
That's right.
I mean, that should never happen to anyone. And yet there she sat with a sick child.
That's right, with a fever.
Yeah, I mean, no words, really.
We're so lucky to have both your perspectives on this because it is so insightful. The vast majority of us are never going to go to these zones and frankly don't have the courage or instinct to do so. So thank you so much, Kate and Matt, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.